Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 300 library systems across the United States and Canada with the goal of making author talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of our wonderful, best-selling, and highly acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our Author Talk series year-round. Today, we are so excited and happy to welcome New York Times bestselling novelist and comic book writer Charles Soule to talk about his newest book, The Endless Vessel. Welcome, Charles. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. This is amazing. What a nice thing to do on a nice Saturday.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on a Saturday. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on a Saturday. It's definitely a fun thing to do, and depending on where you are in the world, in the country, it's probably nice to get out of the heat for a little while. So I know that we're super excited to get started, but before we begin, I do want to pause and kind of give that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly. We have compiled some viewer questions that were pre-submitted with registration, so thank you for doing that. But we will also be taking your additional questions throughout this conversation. So when you do have a direct question for Charles, you can click that questions button that's below the live stream. There are a few tabs there, one of which says questions. You can do that at any point in time to submit your question. If you're unable to attend the full talk for any reason, you will receive a thank you for attending email in about 24 hours. And in that email, you'll find a link to the recording. So now to formally introduce our guest for today. Charles Soule is a New York-based, #1 New York Times bestselling novelist, comic book writer, musician, and former attorney. While he has worked, I was going to say while he has docked, I don't know what that meant, but so while he has worked for DC and other publishers, he is best known for writing Daredevil, She-Hulk, Death of Wolverine, and various Star Wars comics from Marvel Comics, as well as his creator-owned series 8 Billion Genies and Curse Words, Undiscovered Country, Letter 44, and the Shrouded College series, which began with Book 1, Hell to Pay, in November 2022. His first novel, The Oracle Year, was released in April 2018. His second novel, Anyone, was released in November 2019. And his third original novel, The Endless Vessel, the title of note for today. Again, welcome. How are you today?
I am great. It is hot here too. I'm in upstate New York, but I don't think it's as hot here as it is in other parts of the country. So I hope everybody's staying cool.
Yeah, I am in New Orleans, and so it's about 120 degrees.
Yeah.
So I can hear my neighbors playing in their pool next door. So hopefully it doesn't get too raucous over there, and I'm only a little jealous because I get to sit here and chat with you. So that's okay. So we have a lot of people that have asked about kind of like your journey to being a writer, but specifically even the multiple careers that you've had. So Fiona says, you've had multiple careers. How did you move from attorney to musician to comic book writer and novelist? And Emily simply just says, tell me about your education. So could you talk a little bit about your path?
Sure. So let's see, what's the best way to do this? The reason I'm a writer today really is because I went to law school. And the minute I graduated from law school and took the bar, I realized that I'd made a gigantic mistake is what I would say. And that's me being a little bit glib about it. I practiced law for something like 17 years, and I don't regret it. That time was very important to me. I did work that I think is meaningful, but I always have seen myself as a creative person, a person who wanted their life to be built around creativity. I used to, when I was in the early years of practicing law, I used to, like, every birthday candle wish I would make, or like wish upon a falling star, that kind of thing, was always, I wish that I could have a life that was entirely about creativity. And so the way I get into law was basically just things build momentum in your life. And a lot of things during college and others sort of just pushed me in that direction. I ended up going to a great law school, went to a great undergrad, went to University of Pennsylvania for undergrad and Columbia for grad school. So awesome, right? Great schools, great education. But it wasn't what I knew I wanted to do. So literally after taking the bar exam, I went on a little vacation just to decompress. And I went to a stationery store where I was and went in and bought one of those composition notebooks, those like black and white pebbled composition books, and started writing my first novel longhand in it. I finished that book. It took me several years. I got an agent, which is glossing over a lot of like late nights after working at the law firm, like writing on the subway in New York City. Just lots of very focused effort to try to push my life in the direction I wanted it to go. Eventually I got an agent. He took the book out. The book did not sell, which was a heartbreaker, because I had spent, I think that happened in probably 2003, after I'd been working on this book for 3.5 years. And his advice was just start another book. And so I started writing another book, but I also was like, there's a lot of effort to write novels, especially when there's no chance that they're going to get any chance of return, or actually move you in the direction you want to be, particularly because as a first-time novelist, they want you to have the whole first draft done before you can submit it. So you have to go through the entire process of getting a novel ready to go before you can even have a chance of finding out whether or not it's going to go anywhere. So I looked to other creative fields that I was really interested in. I've been a musician since I was really, really little. My mom had me playing violin when I was 3. I got into guitar and like rock and jazz stuff in high school and college. And so I was in a whole bunch of bands in college and thought maybe that's what I would end up doing. But sustaining a law career, trying to write, and being in a band at the same time was not something I could do. So music kind of shifted to the wayside. But I thought of another creative field that I could possibly try and find my way into that seemed to be a little less gatekeepery, a little less focused on sort of taking things all the way to the finish line. And so that was comics. And comics has sort of a kind of a minor league, like in baseball system, or it did, where you could make your own short comics and go to festivals and conventions and show them to people, and sometimes like print up 50 copies and sell them to people. And if you're lucky and the right person in those 50 people or 100 people sees it, you start to build a reputation for yourself as doing interesting work. And I started that process around 2004. So like the year after my first novel didn't sell, I started exploring that. And it took a really, really long time, because you have to understand how to make comics. You have to understand who the sort of people you need to network are. You have to get out there. And this was all largely before social media was really a thing. A lot of how I interacted with people was on message boards. So eventually, though, that started to build up enough momentum that I published my first graphic novel in 2009. So you should be keeping track of the timeline here, right? Because I started trying to have a creative life in this very focused way in 2000. I didn't have my first publication that was in any way meaningful until 2009. And then from there, that's just another rung on the ladder. I kept building until in late 2012, DC Comics approached me to write one of their signature characters, Swamp Thing, which was a huge feather in my cap. I don't know how many Swamp Thing fans there are in this chat. Hopefully 1 or 2, but it was a big deal for me. It was a gigantic level up. And so that came out in 2013, spring of 2013. So now we're at 13 years before I had anything like that would be considered like major league level in comics or prose or anything.
And you're still practicing law at this time?
I absolutely was. By this time I had started my own practice. I was doing immigration work. So I was maintaining all of that at the same time. And like in immigration law, you can't screw up because it's people's lives on the line. You can't screw up in any type of law, of course, but particularly in immigration, which is a field that I really love and is personal to me, because you're helping people's lives be better in one way or another. But it takes a lot of time and focus for sure. So Swamp Thing kicks in. One of the easiest ways to get a job writing at Marvel Comics is by writing at DC Comics, because they're kind of rivals. And so Marvel approached me to start writing a book for them called Thunderbolts, which started coming out in almost exactly 10 years ago, July 3rd, 2013. And from then, I kept getting jobs and jobs. Eventually, Star Wars came calling, and then the bigger books started come calling, which was amazing. And I went back to novels when my profile was big enough that it was easier for me to get an agent. So now around 2016 is when I got my wonderful agent, Seth Fishman. And then eventually I was able to sell that book to HarperCollins. They put it out in 2018, and then here we go. So the that's a very quick summary. Well, maybe it doesn't feel as quick to people listening, but it's a quick summary of the decision to become a professional, have a life built entirely around creativity, and to going to the point where I could actually close my law firm was around 17 or 18 years. And I look back at it, I told this story many times, and it seems like, how did I do that? How did I stay focused for that long and keep my eyes on the prize and not just get discouraged and get away from it? And I think the answer is, one, I really, really, really knew it was for me and knew it's what I wanted to do. And second, I was able to maintain a focus on the joy that I found in each rung of that ladder. So it wasn't about either I'm a famous #1 New York Times bestselling novelist or I'm unhappy. It was either I have creation in my life. I am telling stories. I am finding an audience. I'm building. There was always a sense of growth, and I took a lot of joy in that. I still take a lot of joy in that. So it took an astonishingly long time. I am not by any stretch of the imagination an overnight success, but it was always worth it.
Mm-hmm. So when you went back to novels, did you revisit that very first novel that you wrote and try to get that to work?
It's still in the drawer. I have looked at it. It's interesting. The authorial voice is very different than the way I write now. It is something that I've thought about it. It would probably play as more of a YA novel than the stuff I do now. But it's interesting. Let me put it this way. I've thought about it. It would be something that maybe I would do when I wasn't focused on whatever the next thing is that I have to do and that I've already committed to do. And I'm kind of a forward-looking guy, so I'm not sure. It might stay in the drawer. But then again, who knows? It seems a shame to waste an entirely completed novel too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of leads me to Larry's question next, which a lot of people have asked Sierra as well, about your writing process and routine. So especially being so busy and doing so many things over the last 17 to 18 years, what kind of routines and processes did you have in place to keep yourself going?
The longhand writing I mentioned has been a surprisingly effective part of the process from the very beginning, because when you're writing in longhand, you can do it anywhere, and you don't always have to be writing final prose. I mean, I was trying to do that when I was writing that first novel, but now I use notebooks constantly. I have a gigantic and growing collection of multicolored moleskin notebooks that I'll buy for a given project or a novel, and I will just write all of my notes, all of my initial brainstorming, all of my ideas, all of my phone call notes that I take with different stakeholders. All of that stuff goes into those notebooks, and I can do that stuff. I can get out of my house. I mean, I'm in my studio right now, which is amazing. I love working here, but sometimes it's nice to go look, sit in the trees, or not literally in the trees, sit where there are trees nearby. Outside is the word I think I was looking for.
I'm trying to picture that, climbing with your notebook.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, sit outside or go to a coffee shop, or I love actually sitting at bars and working, which is something that is I guess a little bit of a writerly cliche. But what I like about it is the energy there. If there's only one other person, then I get, and there are a couple other people and they're having a conversation, I can hear it and it bugs me. But if it's a full bar, then it's like a white noise machine, but it's a living white noise machine, which for whatever reason, I find very, it gets the creative gears really going. So, and all of that work, I can just sit there and be the weirdo at the end of the bar with a drink that I have very slowly, and just sit there for hours and work on things. So that element is a huge part of my process, and actually losing it during the pandemic quarantine was a real, it made things really difficult because I rely on it a lot. So the other thing beyond just the longhand, and the reason the longhand notebooks are such a part of the process, is I'm a big believer that you don't have all your ideas at once. You don't have all your good ideas at once. You don't have all your bad ideas at once. And a lot of times you can't have the really good ideas until you've had a lot of bad ideas first. And so I have built a lot of things into my process that allow me to iterate. So I am not a person who starts or even expects to be writing a final draft from go. I start with themes and ideas and characters and random thoughts, and then I start making some connections, and then I do that, and I keep going along that path. For example, when I'm writing a novel, there's a program that I'm sure many people listening to this are familiar with called Scrivener, which is a word processing program that is specifically designed to help writers get to their first draft. And the way that it does that is by letting you organize your ideas really well. So it gives you the option to kind of type in all your rough thoughts, like that aren't even a story, and then start putting them in boxes. Like, oh, this could be a character idea. This could be an ending idea. This could be a plot or a moment or a beat. And then those start to take shape within the program. And then you can use that to organize it into chapters or sections. And then you can use that to generate a first draft and so on. So it's, once again, always about, it's kind of like the analogy that I used when I was talking about the ladder climbing and the 17 years and all of that. I think that good creativity has to be a process. And the more you're focused on the ending of it, the less happy you'll be with the reams of work you have to do between now and that final product. You have to find enjoyment and thrill in every element of that process, because I don't care if it's a comic book script or a novel, it's going to take a while. So I just try to let myself, I try to break the largeness of it into discrete chunks that allow me to reflect on the ideas I've already had, let them gel in my head a little bit before I go forward to the next section.
Thank you for that. Let's jump forward to talking about The Endless Vessel. Can you give everybody a quick summary of The Endless Vessel?
I can. The Endless Vessel is my newest book. I am incredibly proud of it. I hope some folks listening to this have read it or have picked it up or are considering reading it. I think it is my best work for sure, and that is saying, I would like to think that's saying something. It's certainly, I'm proud of a lot of things I've done, but I think The Endless Vessel is another level. The feel of it is sort of like a David Mitchell book or an Anthony Doerr book. It is a set in the real world, but it has some slightly sort of fantastical or magical realist elements to it. The plot of the book is about a young woman. She's about 32, named Lily Barnes. She lives in Hong Kong. She's a British expat. She works as a materials engineer, trying to figure out materials that will help stop climate change. The backdrop of her world is that there is a sort of, it's almost a kind of a depression plague that is affecting many people around the world. It's called the Gray. And the basic idea behind that is that lots of people kind of at the same time have come to this realization that maybe humanity's time on Earth is done. There's too many things that are kind of seem to be piling on all at once, whether it's climate change or pandemics or political unrest or AI, you name it. And people are just like, wow, maybe we've just screwed it up, and it's time to kind of just, I don't have the energy to fight all of that anymore, is kind of the way it goes. And that is obviously a huge problem. And the world is really starting to wind down. And so Lily is pushing against that by doing a job that she feels is incredibly important and using her mind and her skills to try to affect one of the things that is hurting the world and humanity, which is climate change. So within that job, she comes across this piece of technology that can do what she has been trying to do within her science, but it's so advanced it might as well be from like aliens or time travel or something. And so she sets out on almost like a treasure hunt to figure out who made it, and that leads her to this secret society that has started in Massachusetts in 1789, and is kind of a sort of like a Jules Verne scientist group that originally started trying to conquer death. They tried to take a scientific approach to defeating death, and they have done many things in the 250 years since they started trying to do that. And one of them was building a super cool ship that they've been sailing around the world ever since. It's called the Lazarine. So Lily encounters that ship, and awesome things happen. And that is about as much summary as I want to give. Part of the joy of this book is really the encounters you have along the way. It is very much it's the journey, not the destination kind of thing. Although the destination is pretty good in this book too. So I think it is really thematically cool. The thesis of the book is about happiness and how we find it and how we look for it and how we lose it. And I set myself the challenge when I was starting to write it of really saying, what is the secret to happiness, and not in like a sort of loosey-goosey self-help way, but actually trying to answer it. And I think the book does. The last third of the book directly wrestles with that question and presents what I think is the answer. And so certainly makes me happy to think about it, and I hope that readers will find it too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so most of our questions about the Endless Vessel will also stay more general, so we don't give too many things away, but general in the best way to definitely entice people to go out and pick it up if they haven't yet. So Carla's asking, did you write this book? Did you start to write this book before, during, or after COVID?
Well, I wrote it, I started it, I sold it because one of the nice things about becoming an established novelist is that you can sell books on like a pitch and a few chapters as opposed to the whole thing, which is great. So I sold it to HarperCollins, who are amazing and have treated me incredibly well, in the sort of like fall of 2019. But I didn't really dig into writing it until the pandemic, until quarantine. And I found it to be incredibly, incredibly difficult. I would guess that many of the authors you've spoken to here have said similar things. Maybe not all of them, but I found creative work to be pretty tricky during the pandemic. And I'm back to full effect now, I think. But it was really hard then, and it was hard because this was a book that required enormous. I had to dig really, really deep in terms of the creative reserves. There's a big historical element to it that requires enormous research. And I couldn't, like, the whole first act of the book is set in Hong Kong, which is a place that I lived when I was growing up. And I really, really wanted to go back there to experience it again viscerally in the way that before I was going to write about it. And I had the trip kind of planned, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're not going anywhere. And so, it is a pandemic book. It is directly focused on the idea of the things the pandemic and the quarantine took away from all of us. It is about a shared experience that we all had, which was, if not quite as serious as the Greys depicted in the novel, it's kind of, we all had a very dark time that we had to get through. So it is absolutely influenced by the pandemic, but it also is pushing back against that time. It's pushing back against whatever darkness we have in the world right now. And there's plenty if you want to focus on it, but this is a direct response to the idea of say doom scrolling or something like that. It's anti-doom scrolling.
Okay. Isabella's asking what world events other than COVID have inspired the book.
Oh, there's a lot. I'm a big sort of, not revisionist history. That's a negative way to put it, but like slightly tweaked history guy. So I like doing things all the way back into the Oracle year and probably before. I like the idea of saying, well, this historical event, well, actually there was an alien there, or whatever the thing might be. And so there's a ton of that in Endless Vessel, because the idea is that the ship that's been sailing for 250 years with these brilliant people on it, many of whom are not, the society was started by the wife of a person who died, which is why she was so focused on getting away around death. And she lived in sort of Puritan era Massachusetts outside of Boston, which was a time when it was difficult for women to inherit, much less move with much agency through the world at all. And so a lot of the people that she recruits for her group are like the assistants of really famous men. I mean, very famous white men, basically. So their assistants, their servants, their spouses, people who are just as capable but are marginalized within society of the time. And so that group becomes the heart of the society on the ship, the Lazarine, and they sail all around the world. But their view about their role within the world is partly that they should try to make it better from time to time. Some of them are isolationists, some of them want to get involved with the world. And so they do these things called intercessions from time to time, which are directly using their advanced scientific knowledge or sort of acumen to affect world events. So there are bits and pieces of world event things that I weave the Lazarine into as you read it. For example, they're directly involved in the smallpox cure. So there's Dr. Jenner in Scotland who figured out cowpox and all that stuff. The Lazarines are surprised they actually had something to do with that, and things along those lines. So there's a lot of historical stuff that is fun. And then beyond that, I have a friend, a good friend of mine named Daniel Kibblesmith. He's also a writer. He's great. And I saw him recently when I was on book tour, and he made a comment. He's read all my stuff, which is very kind of him. And he made a comment that when we saw each other in LA, that was really, I thought was very perceptive about what I'm trying to do, perceptive in a way that I didn't even realize it's what I'm doing. But when he said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing. I'm going to tell other people that every chance I get. And so here I am telling other people that. But basically what he said was, when you write something, whether it's a novel or one of your like high concept comics, that you write it as if, oh, well, this is how it would actually go. So whether it's aliens coming to Earth, or somebody being able to predict the future, or technology being invented that lets you switch your body into somebody else, or in this case, a secret society sailing around the world for 250 years, this is how it would actually probably go. And that is part of what makes my books appealing to people, because I really think through my concepts and think through my ideas and try to express them on the page to the furthest possible degree. And so, getting back to the question you actually asked, there's a lot of thinking about the way a ship like this, a society like this, would interact with the world, the way an actual depression plague would affect the world, the way that something like that might be pushed back, the things people would try to push it back. So the real world and historical events are always woven into my work, I think, but in a way that doesn't like get in the way of the story or the characters that are being told.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of characters, Burley is wondering, how did you come to have a 32-year-old gangly redheaded Lily be the lead for this future world saga?
And she's British too, which I didn't have to do, and it made my life more difficult to make her British. It was one of those things where I thought I had a pretty good handle on British terms and slang and way of talking and way of thinking, right? It's not just like, oh, oi, governor. It's also about the way a British person might view the world, and having lived overseas and all of the elements. Like, you always have to dig as hard as you can into the characters, and choices that might seem arbitrary at the beginning, like, oh, she's a redhead. When you go into it, you start wondering, why did my subconscious make this person a redhead? Mm-hmm. With Lily, I always choose a main character, a lead character. And this book really has 3 lead characters. It has Lily, it has the woman from 1789 named Molly Calder, and then there's another woman who's deeply involved with the Grey named Aunt Jane. And I think about who is the best person to experience the events that are going to be in this journey. Who is the most interesting person to have that happen? And the thing about Lily is that she is somebody who always feels out of place. She's felt out of place her entire life. And I, as I said, I lived in Hong Kong, and I thought about the physical body type that would stand out in Hong Kong and would make a person feel like they were in their own little island of existence. And a tall, gangly redhead with curly hair is somebody who stands out in Hong Kong. And so that it just made sense to me that trying to externalize the things that she's going through in her inner life, but with her external appearance seemed like it would work really, really well here. As far as why she was in Hong Kong, I mean, Hong Kong was part of this book from the start, because it's like when people write their New York City book or whatever as kind of a tribute to the place that they love. That's this. I just love Hong Kong as a place very much, and it was going through a lot when I was writing this book. It still is, and I wanted to just, I don't know, capture it in prose as best as I could.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Hong Kong, I know you said that you'd like kind of planned your trip there, mm-hmm. then everything shut down. Mark is asking, like, when you're writing about a location like Lily's life in Hong Kong, generally, how much of it is based on personal experience versus research? And I'm wondering, have you been able to go back to Hong Kong since everything kind of calmed down and lifted?
I'll answer that quickly. Yes, I was actually there like last week or the week before. I got to go for just a few days, and it was part of another, like, I was traveling for book tour basically, and I was able to get over there. And man, it felt like there are certain places that are home to you. And even though I haven't lived in Hong Kong for a long time, my family moved away when I was in my early 20s, but it it just feels, there's just things, indelible memories. Like when you're in your teens, things that happen to you become formative in a very specific way. And Hong Kong is that place for me. It's just beautiful. I love it there. The people are awesome. The food is awesome. Like the sounds and smells, some of which are super gross, are awesome, even though they're super gross. It's a really, really interesting, dynamic, fascinating place. So I loved being able to get back there. But the question before that, I think, was how much of that is based in personal experience versus my like research. And a lot of it is based on my personal experience, because there are things that are not going to change about Hong Kong. I don't care what sort of governmental changes or that, like, there are things about the people that are always going to be about the people. Just like New York City is always going to be New York. LA is always going to be LA to a certain degree. And that was all borne out when I went back. But I also really wanted to try to address some of the things that have happened there societally in the last several years. And so I reached out to friends of mine who are still there and are involved with that side of things to some degree, to the extent you can be anymore. And so I just interviewed them. I just talked to people. What is life like there for expats? What is life like there for locals? What is, so on and so forth. Just trying to get a sense of it that would ring true through Lily's eyes, and also not get in the way of the story I was telling. There's a draft of this book that is much longer, like it's around draft 3, that has a lot of detailed Hong Kong description that I thought was awesome. And it is awesome. It's really, if you wanted a Hong Kong travelogue book, there's a draft of this book that has it, but it just had to go. I mean, there's a whole huge chunk of the Lazarene's journey that I cut out. Like, you just make the choices you have to make the book focused on the characters, because that's what people really are reading your books for.
Mm-hmm. And so the Louvre, then, it makes me think, is that based off of, because you were very descriptive in that opening chapter about the Louvre and what Leduc was looking at and where he was walking through. So was that something, was there like a 3D tour that you could do, or?
I mean, I have been extremely fortunate in my life in terms of travel. I don't want to pretend that I haven't. My parents prioritized travel for us when I was really little. And I was very lucky that they put, they took us places that they couldn't afford to take us. And so I've been to the Louvre a lot of times, not like 100 times, but enough that I know it pretty well. And so things like Wing Victory up at the top of those stairs where Leduc almost falls, like, I know that staircase really well. There are things that I fudged. Like there's a bit where there are like, he looks out a window near the Mona Lisa's room. There are no windows in that hall. There's no curtains, but that's authorial license. I'm fine with that. Nobody's dinged me on that yet. So I know it. That said, why not use the tools that are available? There are 3D tours. There are lots of, like, I think you can Google Maps, like, walk through it, the whole thing virtually. And so I did do some of that. I had a version of it. The first version of that chapter I essentially wrote from memory, and then when I was doing my revisions, I went back into it and was like, whoa, this is some like weird fantasy Louvre that only exists in my head. And so I fixed a lot of it. I kept the windows because I really wanted them to hold the painting out the window on the second floor. But yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, kind of getting back to characters just a little bit, Andrew just asked, do you think that Lily Barnes is a new kind of superhero?
I think the thing that Lily Barnes is she is someone who can take, like, kind of an emotional beating and keep moving forward in a way that is pretty admirable. I think the things that Lily Barnes deals with in this book and that happened to her before this book would cause most people to just be like, I'm out. I'm not going to do this anymore. And instead, she finds a way to find great insight about herself. She takes the bad things that have happened to her and turns them into, like, extraordinarily positive things, not just for her, but for the entire world. And she she saves the world. This is getting into the third act of the book, which I really want people to experience as they read it. But I think I admire the choices that she made. I think that she moved the world to a better place in a way that I think would do us all a lot of good if we all did that kind of thing more often.
Mhm. In the Endless Vessel, Annika's wondering if, or I guess just in your general work, if you tend to choose characters or give them traits that connect to people in your real life.
Yes, I don't think any author who says they don't do that is not being entirely truthful with you. I would think it's just it's how conscious they are of it, and whether they realize it when they're doing it. In my case, there were big chunks of this book that I didn't really realize I was writing about what I was writing about until much later. And I think a great example of that is Lily's relationship with her father and Frederick Barnes. And the thing that characterizes that relationship is that Frederick is a very brilliant, like, neurologist in his own right, and he is very distant, and he's one of those like absorbed in his work guys. And so that is one of many reasons Lily as a child felt like she was alone in her life. And he makes a lot of choices putting the work first, basically. And I was writing this book, and then I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I have a daughter. I have a teenage daughter who I should be, we have a great relationship. I pay a lot of attention to her. We are awesome. Everything's really good. But it's almost like I was writing a cautionary tale to myself, because she's going to go off to college herself in a few years. And you don't get the years back that you had when they're little. Like, they're only young once, and you're only their parent in this particular time in their life once. And so I think I was speaking to myself, communicating with myself through this novel in a way that I didn't fully understand until I was well into it. And I think it's great. I think when authors do that kind of thing, when their subconscious can come out through the book and make a story that's compelling, it's a magic trick. It's the most amazing thing in the world.
Also has to be like somewhat therapeutic for the author.
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on the conclusion of what you're writing about. I mean, in this case, I know I'm not Frederick Barnes. I know I wouldn't make the choices he makes. I know for sure that that's true. But the author has to reckon with what they've done with their characters and how I'm sure plenty of authors, and I'm sure I've done it myself, have written bad things in their characters that are reflections of things they see in themselves, but they don't realize they've done it. They're just kind of like, it's always a dialogue. You're always in dialogue with whatever stories you're telling.
So there are a lot of really big themes in the Endless Vessel. Mental health, of course, climate change is a big one right off the bat. And I have to say that I never paid too much attention to like carbon capture technology before reading the book. I'm sure I should have been, but I didn't. And interestingly, I was listening to a Wall Street Journal news podcast, and all of a sudden they start talking about, like 2 days ago, they start talking about carbon capture companies booming at the moment. And start talking about scrubbers and how California has a $25 million project underway, and Wyoming and Colorado are partnering with direct air capture companies. And I'm just like, okay, I don't know that I would have tuned into that so acutely if I wouldn't have read this book and just known what it was. So is this something that you've been following for a while? Like, was this a seed of how this idea started?
It was in there from the beginning, the idea that she worked in this. And I will tell you, there was, just like the Hong Kong stuff, there's a draft of this book that has a lot more carbon capture technology stuff in it. But again, cut it out for enjoyment of the readers. I'm very interested and focused on the idea that we have to save ourselves. We have to take action about a lot of different things. Like, there's not going to be any miraculous, Deus ex machina that's going to come down and save us from any of the problems that we've created for ourselves. And carbon capture and climate change mitigation efforts are a way that they make me hopeful. I mean, when humankind puts our mind towards something and puts a lot of resources into it, we can accomplish incredible things. And the difficulty inherent in carbon capture is that you think about every single like every campfire that's ever been burned from like the 100,000 years ago, the first fires, they burned wood. Every piece of coal, every bit of oil, all of that smoke went into the air. All of our industrial processes, everything we've ever burned is the carbon that's in the air. And essentially that's what we need to pull back out of the air and find some place to put it. And it's almost unbelievable to think about how we would ever accomplish something like that. But I have faith in humanity being able to figure something out. We're clever people, and I like the idea in my work of offering people solutions to reasons to have hope, I guess is the way to put it. And the Endless Vessel in particular was something that I thought was worth doing for that. My book 8 Billion Genies has a lot of that kind of thing going on too. It presents the darkest possible experience, but also offers the light to counteract it.
Mm-hmm. Another theme, or just kind of like, I mean, even a character to an extent in the book was the wordy.
Oh yeah.
And it definitely, it's something that as a person with a toddler, I'm very cognizant of like putting my phone down as much as possible so that I don't seem like I'm always just looking at this thing when she's in the room. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about what wordies are? And sure. Is it kind of a commentary on, you know, you thinking that we're kind of too involved in technology?
I mean, I think we are. I think like my daughter, again, she's a teenager. And so I've seen her like have struggles with screens, as it wasn't bad when she was young, but now like it's just part of the social ecosystem of being a teenage kid is screens and all of the social media platforms and all that's very much present. So within the story of The Endless Vessel, though, there is this idea that there is a group or almost a cult called Team Joy Joy, and they are all about the gray. They think it's a great thing. They find it to be a very joyful thing that humanity has been able to realize that it's over, and they are trying to convince the rest of humanity to basically to get the gray and just to let go and to say, you know, if you let go of any sense or hope for the future, all of a sudden every day is going to feel like the first day of summer vacation. You have no responsibilities. If you really don't have to worry about what's going to happen and you're just going to live out the days you got, hey, life is going to be great. And so they do a lot of things to try to convince people that this is the case and take away things that people would care about. So like they burn universities, they burn the Louvre, they burn museums, they burn movie studios and TV studios. Interesting thing right now with the strike, but they are trying to say, embrace now, find joy in the present, find joy in the moments that you have. And not everybody who gets the gray feels that way. It's one of 3 variants that the gray expresses itself through, but they figure just percentage wise, the more people they can get the gray, the more people will be part of their group too. So they kind of distribute this thing within the book called the Despair Manifesto, which is basically a YouTube video of this guy who makes some really strong points, to put it mildly, about why humanity's time is over. That was very difficult to write. I did not like writing those words, but it had to. Part of me was, I almost left it out of the book and just I was gonna make it something people would just like talk about as opposed to actually showing it. But then I thought that's being cowardly, and I would need to. I really wanted to try to make it feel the way it would need to feel. So anyway, there's this thing out there, the Despair Manifesto, that if you listen to it, it kind of gets its hooks in your mind and you end up inevitably getting the gray if you listen to it. And so what they've been doing, Team Joy Joy, is inserting it into the middle of YouTube videos about other things and putting it on electronic billboards in Times Square and doing everything they can to hack into existing video systems to put it out there, which is not uncommon. I mean, that happens with all kinds of videos these days, the sort of insertions of foreign video material. So in response to that, a lot of people who use smartphones have changed the operating system so it will not allow them to have videos or images or anything other than text. Every people's phones become completely text-based. So they're still smartphones, they can get online and stuff, but there's no images, no video. no audio. It's all just text. And the slang that has come up within the book, in the world of the book, is that those phones are called wordies. And people who are conscious of trying to not get the gray inadvertently, just they download the wordy operating system to their phone and they use their wordies. So that's what it is.
Great. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're gonna go to a bit of a segue. Joshua is asking, how has writing for the Star Wars universe influenced your writing of The Endless Vessel?
Every story you write influences the next story you write. It's just the way it goes. And the thing that's they're very, very different. I mean, Star Wars, you're essentially writing fake history almost, like I did, but it doesn't feel fake. It's like you're writing new myths within a mythological framework. It's like you're writing new stories for Apollo and Zeus and all that stuff, because that is really how most of the characters, or many of the characters within the Star Wars galaxy and the events of the Star Wars galaxy have been come to be perceived. They are a mythology that is as vivid as anything from classical mythology, I think, maybe even more so these days. And so there are rules around it. There are things that you can and can't do, because if and beyond just the, well, lightsabers aren't, I guess they're most colors these days, but I don't know, like whatever the, choose your rule within Star Wars, you can't break it. But within something like the Endless Vessel, you can do whatever you want. You're inventing the world from scratch. I think that one of the things that Star Wars writing and in comic writing in general has really helped me to do is to figure out how to compress a story into the best possible events, the single events to tell the story. Because like when you're writing a comic for Marvel or DC or creator owned, you have about 20, 22, maybe 24 pages to do it. That's the issue. And that's not many moments really to get the story going. Essentially, a comic issue is, I don't know, 4 or 5 scenes, depending on how you break it out. There's a lot of tricks you can do to expand that, make it seem bigger, smaller, focus, draw the audience's attention here or there. But you have to get really, really good at choosing exactly the moments, exactly the lines of dialogue that will convey what you want to convey. And these days, I write my chapters in my novels as if they were issues of a comic. And when I break the novel down, I write it, I figure it out. So I'm showing people no more than they need to see eventually, once I get through the edits and cut all the extraneous stuff, the research I've done or whatever. But I'm showing people exactly the moments. There's no fat on that story. Everything is designed to push the themes forward, push the plot forward, push the characters forward. And that comes directly from writing in these mediums where there's no room for extemporaneous sort of going wild and pushing past the page count, in part because every extra page or every extra beat you add, some artist who is exquisitely talented has to spend their time and effort drawing. And so they're like your secret weapon, and you don't want to waste any of that, waste their time or waste their energy on anything they don't need to draw. So yes, part of that comes from Star Wars. Part of it just comes from working in that medium. But like I said at the beginning, every story I've told in the past builds toward the next story I'm going to tell.
Quinn says, hi, my family are big fans of your comic books. My 12-year-old asks, why do you like writing comic books?
Well, the quick answer is because they're awesome. They've always been awesome. I have loved them since I was little, much younger than 12. My brothers and sister and I all read them growing up. My dad read them. My mom read them. They've just been part of my creative life forever. And some of the coolest moments and stories I can think of came from comics. Every comic issue is like a little movie that you get to hold in your hands, and you get to read it until it's tattered and ripped apart, and you never know what's going to happen. And they're always so surprising because comics don't have sort of the same restrictions and restraints that like a big movie does. That like comics, they don't have to worry about the money or the actors or any of that stuff. They can just be whatever the writer and the artist's imagination want to put on that page. And so I think the fact that comics can give you anything and can give you everything is why they're so fun to make. Because anything I can think of, I can put on that page. And then in not too much time, I get to see it drawn beautifully by a wonderful artist. So that's why I would say I like them.
Well, that is pretty amazing. Kind of like your vision come to life. That's
Mm-hmm.
pretty awesome. Rachel says, what was your favorite part about developing a whole new era and series for Star Wars: The High Republic?
Well, getting to do it. What Rachel's asking about is several years ago, I was approached by Lucasfilm, a wonderful executive there who's become a really close friend of mine named Michael Seglain, because he was trying to put together, open up a new zone in the historical timeline of Star Wars. And he wanted to do it through publishing. So novels and comics and young adult books, middle grade, how-to books, all kinds of different stuff. And his vision was to bring together a group of 5 authors who were all experienced Star Wars writers, but were good at Star Wars. We approached Star Wars from different directions, and he brought us all out to Skywalker Ranch of all places, which was very inspiring, and we started to break out what it would be. And so, having been a Star Wars fan since I was really little, and then being told, okay, make a new one, basically. Like it was the sky is completely open, blue sky, do whatever you think, and then when we need to rein you back, we'll rein you in. But ultimately we just got to go from zero and make a entirely new part of Star Wars, with new characters and new Jedi and new antagonists and new technology and new locations and new aliens and everything. That has now expanded out significantly. There are 2 TV shows, several video games, huge, like it's become a true, real thing. And it came from us, from our minds and our hearts. And it is the best we could do. We gave the best of ourselves to making this new part of Star Wars. So it's awesome. I mean, imagine if like someone said, okay, here's your favorite thing. You get to make more of it, and not like you get to make your own version of it that's going to be held up just alongside all the versions of it that everyone's ever loved alongside you. It is still hugely pinched me. We go to these like Star Wars celebrations, the 5 of us, and now there's more authors involved, but the core 5. We'll go to Star Wars Celebration, which is the big Star Wars celebration they do once a year. We'll go to like Disney World. We'll go to places and we'll like get recognized. I mean, I'm not saying we're Mark Hamill or Harrison Ford, we're not. But it feels like we did something that was not just meaningful for us, but meaningful for the fans. And it
was meaningful for the fans. So it should feel like that. Good.
It's the best feeling. People write us and talk to us all the time about how this has helped them or moved them. And it moves us too. So it's great.
That's incredible. Well, we're getting a couple of questions about 8 billion genies. So I want to spend a couple minutes on that. James and Evan are asking, what was the inspiration behind 8 billion genies?
Well, the inspiration was, I have a very, very good friend who's one of those incredible artists that I mentioned earlier. His name is Ryan Brown, and he and I have been friends for a long time. We did a long comic book series together called Curse Words for Image Comics, which is one of the places where you can make comics that are completely your own idea and own them and do whatever you want with them. It's great. So we did Curse Words. We loved it. We did it for about 3.5, 4 years. And then when it finished, we took a break from that book, and also just from working together, because sometimes you need a little bit of a break. And then we took that break and thought, okay, let's do something else. What should we do? And we kind of had like a laundry list of ideas, and Ryan and I are big fans of expansive ideas that have high concepts at their core, that allow us to really insert tons of ideas into them, and most importantly, make each other laugh. Our comics are funny that we make together. They're strange or a little bit surreal, but there's always a deep humanity at the core of it. And so we were trying to find an idea that would maintain all of that for the next thing that we were going to do. And one of the ideas that we had on the table was something that Ryan had said years ago, like years earlier, as just part of he liked to make up taglines for stories that couldn't be told, is how he would put it. It was just impossible you couldn't actually tell the story. And so the idea that he had was, what if everyone on Earth got a genie and at exactly the same moment with the wishes? And I was like, I think that's kind of cool. He's like, no, it'd be over immediately, because somebody would wish for everyone on Earth to become a pile of batteries or something. And I said, I don't know, man. I bet there's something there. Let me sit on it. And so years later, I pulled that out It was so much time had passed that initially he had pitched it as 7 billion genies, and now it had to become 8 billion genies because so many years had passed. But I thought the idea of exploring the idea that everyone on Earth has the opportunity to get their heart's desire, but everybody else on Earth has the opportunity to get their heart's desire too, like at the same time. So you get yours, but everybody else gets theirs too, and there's going to be conflict there. Could be really, really interesting. And then it became about trying to whittle that into a shape that would allow a story to be told and not actually have the world turn into the pile of batteries or ice cream cone or whatever. And we just put our heads together, and Ryan used his incredible design skill to come up with a super cool set of ideas for how the genies would look. I came up with the rules for how the world would work, and then we just went to the races. But we wanted to do something that would have no boundaries, that would take advantage of the potential of comics, and then just be fun. And we stumbled upon something that people really, really connected with and loved, which is awesome.
That's great. Keith is saying, do you have any other plans for another comic book series set in Michigan? He loved that it was in the St. Clair shores in Detroit.
Yeah, well, Ryan and I are both Michigan boys. Before my family moved to Hong Kong, I lived in Michigan. I lived in Detroit and Grand Rapids, and he grew up in Detroit, Grosse Pointe. And so we both really like Michigan. We have Michigan roots, and it's our, like, we can talk about the weird kinds of soda pop they have there, and just different stuff that makes us happy, that connects with other people too from Michigan, or know things about Michigan. So I would say odds are pretty good. The next thing we're doing, I'm working on it now, and I would be amazed if there are not some Michigan or Detroit elements that find their way into it. It's also kind of a write what you know, draw what you know thing, and it means we can also go, but yeah, Vernors. That's somebody in the chat just referenced the Michigan soda pop, which is indeed Vernors. That's what I was thinking of. So I'm sure there'll be Michigan moving forward. Why not? It's a great place. It's a great state.
We have a couple of people wondering what your involvement was with the Disney Plus series, specifically for She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. Karen says, were you happy? What was your involvement, and were you happy with the She-Hulk, Attorney at Law series? Did you, is there any hope of it coming back? Karen loved it. Everything they criticized it for was exactly what I thought was great about it. The episode where she breaks into the writer's room and takes control of her very own story, very innovative and empowering.
Yeah. My role on the She-Hulk show was to act as their legal consultant. So I was the person who I read the scripts and talked to the writer's room and said, well, in an actual courtroom, it probably wouldn't go this way, or this is where the bailiff stands, or, just stuff like that. And they took some of it, and they didn't take some of it. Some of it they couldn't take because it just didn't work for the story they were trying to tell, which is totally fine. I'm not precious about that kind of thing. In those roles, those kind of consulting roles, when I've had them, my goal is to offer advice and try to make it more, give them the way it might work in the real world. But it's really, I know that it's a drama, it's a story, dramatized, and I do the same thing in my own work. There's lots of, like we were talking about before with the Louvre, like if I need the Louvre to have windows, the Louvre's going to have windows. If they need the bailiff to stand on this side of the room instead of that side of the room, they're going to do it. It's fine. But it was a really fun gig. I loved how the show came out. She-Hulk, I had a run on She-Hulk as the part of the start of my run on Marvel, doing the comics. And so my run was one of the big runs of She-Hulk. And so I had a lot of personal connection to the character. I had a lot of, like, I wanted it to be good. And I thought it was great. I think anybody who criticizes that show, I'm not going to say that opinions aren't valid, right? But the thing that I would say is that not everything has to be for everybody. And that's part of the theme of the comic I wrote. I think that should be just a basic theme of creative work. Like, if you don't like it, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means maybe you're not the audience. And I don't know. I thought it was great. I was very impressed with it. I am friends with many of the writers in that room to this day. As far as will there be more of it, I would not speak to that even if I could, because I would assume a laser beam would come down from space and destroy me if I were to give anything away. But I also know that Marvel, this is not me hinting at anything, but like historically, when is the last time they made something they didn't use someplace else? Like, it's just not the way they operate. So I cannot imagine we won't see Jennifer Walters again. I'm looking forward to wherever she pops up again. I think it'll be cool. But I don't have any specific knowledge as to anything.
Yeah. Well, I am also a huge She-Hulk fan. Reading She-Hulk is what got me reading again after I went to law school, because after law school, I was like, I don't know if I can open a book again. Like, I was like all read out. And then I started reading comics and graphic novels and slowly got back there again. So thank you for that. Okay, last question I like to close with, and both Jillian and Betty Lee have beat me to it, which is, who are your favorite authors? What have you read and enjoyed lately that you think everyone should run to their local library and check out immediately?
Let's see. What have I read that I really liked recently? I really enjoyed, there's a book called Babel by R.F. Kuang. I read that and loved it. There's a book called, I'll read, I'm a huge fan of like Neil Stephenson. I think his work is like hyper detailed, doorstopper, speculative fiction, sci-fi stuff. I don't know. I really enjoy that a lot. I'm a fan of Pung Shepherd. She's a friend of mine. She's blurred books, whatever. Even if she hadn't, I would say this. I think her stuff is really cool. She's got a book called The Cartographers, a book called The Book of M, both of which I recommend. She's awesome. I like, David Mitchell, who I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about the way that the Endless Vessel feels. I think he's just a real miracle worker in terms of what he's able to do, and the way he dives into all these different worlds and evokes them so fully. I would recommend anything with his name on it. I read the new book by Owen King recently. It's called The Curator. I thought that was really awesome. It's this elaborate, hyper detailed, many character, like Dickensian pseudo fantasy horror novel. I'm not doing it justice, but I really enjoyed that. So I don't know. I read a lot. I just went on a vacation, and which was part of that Hong Kong trip I mentioned. And I didn't do any work on it, which was very rare for me. And so I just read. So I read like 5 books, and I read all across various genres. I read The Sympathizer, which I'm spacing the author's name, but won the Pulitzer Prize. It was fantastic. And then I read like, total airplane books that were just fun. I finished there's a book by a good friend of mine named Alex Segura called The Escape Artist. Is that right? I don't think that's right. Hold on. Because I would feel terrible if I messed up the name of his book. He wrote, it is called, sorry, 2 seconds, it's right here. Secret Identity, of course. So that book I loved. I thought it was excellent. It won the LA Times Book Prize, so it's, it deserved it. Yeah, no, I'm just going over time listing books I've read I liked, but I love reading. There's so many good ones, but yeah.
That's good. Thank you for those recommendations. I'm sure people are diligently writing them down. And also, thank you so much for joining us today on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you. It's truly been a pleasure speaking with you for the last hour. Thank you for all of your amazing work that you've brought to the world. Thank you so much.
It was a huge pleasure. Thank you for all the great questions, everybody. And I hope whether it's my book or other books, you'll just read constantly.
With that, I also, of course, want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning into our author talk today. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, again, below that live stream video, you can find a link to Charles's books. I think we've put The Endless Vessel in there, as well as the Star Wars books. We look forward to seeing you all on July 20th when we chat with award-winning psychologist Ethan Kross about his book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters and How to Harness It. And again on July 25th when we talk to New York Times bestselling author Erica L. Sanchez about her most recent book and memoir, Crying in the Bathroom. You can register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I am Brandon Adler. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.